Hey guys, Ron here. Tonight it's another discussion video, and it's another semi-warm night. Of course, it doesn't really matter because I come here all seasons. I come here bundled up in the winter, but sorry about that. As you can, a lot of loud sea lions. So I'm out among the boats. I like it here. It's very relaxing, and I like looking at the boats and having a bad hair day. So I got the hat on. Anyway, tonight I want to talk to you about a subject that still is puzzling to me and very, very interesting to me, and should be to all Americans who study history, politics, current events, so on and so forth. The assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy, of course, was the second youngest of the Kennedy sons of Joe Kennedy and Rose Kennedy. The oldest was Joe Jr., who was killed during World War II in a very risky volunteer mission that he took uh, against the Germans, whose plane blew up over the English Channel. Of course, the next up was Jack Kennedy, President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. We know he was assassinated in Dallas over very mysterious circumstances, November 22nd, 63. And Bobby Kennedy was assassinated June 6, 1968. And the youngest son was Teddy Kennedy, Edward Kennedy, who was the only one who lived out a natural life and was in the Senate for decades, who's probably shocked that he made it that far. But anyway, tonight I want to talk about Bobby Kennedy and his assassination, June 6, as I said, 1968, right here in Los Angeles at the Ambassador Ballroom, hotel that's since been torn down near downtown Los Angeles. It's like I say, there's still questions about it, and there'll always be questions about it, because before the internet, you could, I hate to just use this term, but you could get away with things a lot more easily. The book's closed, and we'll never know what happened because we didn't have cell phone footage. We didn't have adequate audio recording, GPS signals, cameras everywhere. So it's a whole different world in the 21st century than it was in the 20th century. Let's talk a little bit about Bobby Kennedy's assassination. So Robert Kennedy was absolutely devastated by his brother's death, Jack's assassination in Dallas. There's a lot of reported sources, and I believe that Bobby felt very guilty about it. I think that Bobby sensed very correctly that the mob was involved in his brother's assassination, and that he, of course, had relentlessly, as Attorney General, pursued the mob like no one ever had. It was unprecedented, and that this was payback, because once his brother was out of power, Bobby was out of power, and he certainly was. And Hoover, the head of the Justice Department, hated him. Lyndon Johnson hated him. They all hated each other. So Bobby Kennedy basically was a feckless Attorney General for the last months of 63 and into 64. And then he ran for Senate, which was really following the ambitions that his father and his family had for him in politics. So he became a politician in 1964 and won the New York Senate seat. And 4 years later, Bobby Kennedy, went back and forth and back and forth. He decided when he found out, well, let me put it this way. Lyndon Johnson, this was unprecedented too. Lyndon Johnson obviously was Jack Kennedy's vice president and assumed the presidency when Jack Kennedy was murdered in November of 63. So Johnson did win, and won heartily, in 1964. Probably a lot of it was the sympathy vote. He beat Barry Goldwater in 1964, the following year, very easily, the Republican candidate. But by 1968, Lyndon Johnson it was a lot like today, actually. Even though he was a Democrat, even though he was pretty much a liberal Democrat, the liberals in the country despised him, I think, even more than the Republicans, because of Vietnam, mainly because of his continuing the Vietnam War. That he escalated it big time. Obviously, the Gulf of Tonkin incident in '64, but Lyndon Johnson said that Jack Kennedy, his predecessor, had sent advisors to Vietnam. And of course, Lyndon Johnson could have pulled out of Vietnam and not let it escalate. I guess we'll never really be sure why he did let it become a full-blown war. We'll never be sure what really happened at the Gulf of Tonkin. If you research Gulf of Tonkin 1964, you'll see that some have called it a false flag. I mean, supposedly Johnson was quoted by talking to his inner circle saying that they knew that the North Vietnamese were not firing, but that they essentially lied about what was happening to get us into the war, to escalate it and become a fighting war and escalate our involvement. And we know the results of the Vietnam War. The communists ultimately did take over all of Vietnam, and over 1 million people were killed, including 50,000 U.S. servicemen. And a lot of the guys that came back as drug addicts or wounded, injured, and it was a huge traumatic fiasco for the country. It really changed the country. And Bobby Kennedy, who 5 years early had been a huge proponent and a real hawk. I don't want to say a huge proponent, but definitely a hawk. Bobby Kennedy, even though he was a Democrat, Democrats in the 60s were much different than Democrats in 2022. And some Republicans, actually Republicans too, each party, especially the Democrats, have gone a lot further left than they were even in the last 20 years, even the last 10 years. And Bobby Kennedy was no exception. He was a Democrat politically, but he was very hawkish. In fact, Jack Kennedy would probably be called a Republican today. There were certainly no admitted socialists in the party, or even people who call themselves Democratic Socialists. That's a socialist. That may be a Marxist, in my opinion. But you can call a Democratic Socialist, you can call yourself just a socialist, but that was unheard of, even in the 90s. But the party has changed a lot, and some in the Republican Party have changed a lot. Some in the independents have changed. But my point for the purpose of this discussion was that Jack Kennedy was very anti-communism. Bobby Kennedy was very anti-communism. There wasn't all that much difference, actually, between the hawks of Republicans and the Democrats then. There were doves in 1968. George McGovern was almost as left-wing liberal as politicians in 2022 for the Democratic Party. Not quite, but almost. But he was the dove candidate who wanted out of the war. And my point is that by 1968, Bobby Kennedy had changed entirely, and he had begun from the crime-fighting bureaucrat he had been as Attorney General, and the guy that ran all his brother Jack's campaigns and helped Teddy when Teddy got into the Senate in '62. Bobby had changed as a human being. His brother's assassination was so traumatic for him. He spent a lot of time in the years afterwards reading philosophy, reading poetry, and becoming more and more liberal-minded in his politics. He became a big advocate for, at that time it was called the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Now we call them Native Americans, but he was very big into Indian rights, Native American rights. He became very close with the United Farm Workers and the United Farm Workers Union. And he was I guess there wasn't really a prison reform issue at that time, but the prisons weren't as full, the population wasn't as great as that. But my point is, Bobby Kennedy became a real liberal dove, and where he had been deeply involved in what started as his brother Jack, and Bobby was really co-president, let's not kid ourselves, sending the advisors to Vietnam and sending, where Bobby absolutely was not 100%, was certainly not against the idea of escalation. And with the war in Vietnam, our involvement to stop communism in Vietnam, which ultimately didn't happen, but he had completely turned around, and he didn't go out and march with war protesters like a politician would do today and does today, but he he believed what they believed. So Bobby Kennedy had become a very left-wing, very liberal politician, and as a senator, and Lyndon Johnson, as I said, actually decided not to run for a second term, or I guess it would have been almost second and a half, which is unprecedented too. So Lyndon Johnson decided not to run in '68, leaving a wide open field, and Bobby Kennedy and McGovern and Hubert Humphrey all ran, ultimately to be defeated by Richard Nixon. Very possible, though, that Bobby Kennedy would have defeated Richard Nixon. We'll never know. Because on June 6, 1968, Bobby Kennedy had decided to, like I say, run for president. And he got into the game late, but he was making progress in the primaries. And it's reported that even his ex-sister-in-law, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, warned him about running for president, that she believed he still had enemies and that it wasn't safe. And reportedly he told Jackie, they got Jack. If they got Jack, if they're going to get me, they're going to get me. So on the 6th of June, he spent the day actually at the director John Frankenheimer's house in Malibu. He was with Ethel and the family, and they swam, and then they got up for the evening, there was at the Ambassador Ballroom for the California primary, which Bobby Kennedy won. And things were looking really good. In fact, supposedly he said that day, I finally feel like I'm getting out of Jack's shadow, like he'd become his own man. Bobby was very ill at ease, kind of like Nixon, actually. Bobby was ill at ease, unlike his brother Jack. Bobby was very ill at ease with shaking hands. He was tense. He was a little high-strung. When fireworks would go out and he'd be out in public, riding on the top of a car, he would shudder, he would duck, he'd be afraid that it was a gunshot, or maybe it was just the noise that bothered him, or both. But I think that he always had that fear in his head that something might happen to him, and he just went with it and figured, apparently, what destiny was destiny. So when he got shot, so at the Ambassador Ballroom, he had finished his speech. He took an unplanned route through the pantry and the kitchen area. He was shaking hands with some of the kitchen workers, and Sirhan, a 24-year-old Palestinian, was standing atop a table, which, again, I don't know why the bodyguards of Rosie Greer, who was sort of the football player, unofficial bodyguard of Bobby Kennedy, why would they allow a guy to be propped up that high? I didn't even know Sirhan was up that high until recently. And Sirhan stepped up and began firing at him. And then even when they restrained him, they said there was a glazed look in his eyes, and the gun, he just bam, 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 kept shooting. Now, someone fired back. There's a lot of evidence, and you can research this, that there was a second gunman. Now, one of the main theories of this assassination is that the real shooter, that Sirhan was a plant and was perhaps hypnotized. That's a big theory, that he was a product of the so-called MK Ultra experiments of mind control in the 40s or the 50s and 60s, and that he was, again, a so-called Manchurian candidate. He was hypnotized to be an assassin, do his job, and then fade out. Well, so Sirhan is firing. He's restrained. He keeps firing until he emptied his gun. And then there are lots of theories that there were second gun. Now, there's recordings that have been dug up recording more bullets than Sirhan could have fired. So the theory has been for many, many years that the last-minute replacement, Ace security guard, Ace being the company, a guy named Thane Eugene Caesar, that Thane Caesar, the security guard, is the one who actually fired and killed Bobby Kennedy, which, of course, Thane Caesar denied. It said that Bobby had spun around and actually pulled off Thane Caesar's clip-on tie, like he knew it was him who had shot him. Supposedly Thane Caesar was a arch Republican conservative, hated the Kennedy brothers. I don't know how much of this is factual. I don't know how much about his polygraph, but you can certainly research it. And he actually did end up moving out of the country. I believe he died in Switzerland. Perhaps it was because of the scrutiny and because of his name recognition. But he is considered by many to be the actual shooter and, you know, a hired, paid assassin. There's a theory that Aristotle Onassis, who ended up marrying Jackie Kennedy just months after that, had put up the money to a Middle Eastern terrorist organization that had wanted to assassinate a high-profile American on American soil. Now, it's an interesting theory, and supposedly Onassis' daughter, Christina, would never speak to him after that because she knew what he'd done. I mean, it's a school of thought. Do you believe it or not? There's some excellent biographies of Onassis. Onassis hated Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy hated him. Bobby Kennedy certainly didn't want Jackie to marry who they called the guy they called the Greek, Aristotle Onassis, this you know, mob leader of the world, kind of, really. I mean, they say that one of the arch rival characters of the early Bond films was based on Aristotle Onassis, like the mob leader of the world. And his arch nemesis was Howard Hughes, another, you know, Onassis, another mysterious, shadowy figure connected to Nixon of all people. But see, there's a lot there, folks. There's a lot to untangle there. So those are some of the theories. The LAPD has really been raked over the coals over the years for the sloppy job that they did investigating the murder and the murder area, you know, the pantry area, and how they tried to persuade witnesses not to say certain things. Now, there are people who say that a girl in a polka dot dress, she's certainly just known as the girl in the polka dot dress, ran out of the ballroom telling at least one lady, we shot him, and said, who'd you shoot? We shot Bobby Kennedy. So the mysterious identity of polka dot dress has never been revealed. Like I said, because this happened so fast, it's just one of those things that wouldn't happen this way in the 21st century with the internet, cell phone pictures, CCTV cameras everywhere, audio recordings, witnesses more likely to come forward. But that was a different age in 1968. So those are the theories against Sirhan being the sole lone assassin. Now, Sirhan has kind of a shadowy past too. I've done some research that showed that for a while he was working at the Santa Anita racetrack, and of course the theory was that mob guys got wind of Sirhan and became aware of him working with the horses down there in a lowly job at the racetrack, and used him like Lee Oswald very well may have been used. Sirhan kept a diary, and it said, the purported motive of Sirhan was that Bobby Kennedy was going to sell fighter jets to Israel, and that Sirhan, being a proud Palestinian, just couldn't have this. But the dates were wrong too in the speech when Bobby said that, and there were other candidates who were pro-Israel. Even Nixon was, although personally an anti-Semite, that Nixon was pro-Israel. So all the candidates were pro-Israel as a friend, unlike, some politicians with the Democratic Party in 2021-22, the Squad, anyone. But the politicians in those days always regarded Israel as our closest ally. So my point is, along with obviously Western European countries and Mexico and Canada, Australia, as it should be. But my point is there were certainly other politicians who were pro-Israel and were quite upset about the Six-Day War and the wars in which Israel had been attacked since its formation. So that really doesn't hold water with me. And also that Sirhan claims to this day in prison that he has no idea what happened. Just doesn't remember it. Remembers going to the coffee urn, drinking some coffee, and he doesn't remember pulling the trigger or doing anything. What's interesting is also Bobby Kennedy supposedly asked, after he was shot, laying on the ground, he asked if anyone else was shot, if everyone was okay. Shows what kind of guy he was, always thinking of other people. I've also heard that he was saying Jack's name out loud as he was laying there. I don't know if that's true or not. And Bobby did not die right away. He was taken to hospital and died actually technically the next day. I don't believe he was conscious though. So the Sirhan, the theory of Sirhan being a devout Palestinian that hated Bobby Kennedy's pro-Israel stance to some degree, I don't know about that. Like I say, all the other candidates were pro-Israel. Why did he single out Bobby Kennedy? He also says he can't remember firing the gun or anything. Still to this, no motive, doesn't understand what happened. But he was writing in his diary something that people have called what's called automatic writing, like someone who was hypnotized might have done. RFK must die, RFK must die, pay to the order of, please pay to the order of, pay to the order of. Well, that's what a check says on it, pay to the order of. Does this mean Sirhan was paid as a paid assassin? Now, the thing that really gets people is that according to people who believe in hypnosis being a way of using mind control, like the MK Ultra experiments, which we know happened because they're documented, the people who are, like I say, pro this theory of mind control through hypnosis to program someone to commit a act, supposedly this is how it goes. They have something triggers them. Either it's a word or a noise, or maybe it was something in the coffee. Suppose that's one of the theories. But something triggers the victim. Then the victim goes out and carries on their task. In this case, it would be firing a gun at someone and keep unloading the gun until they've done it, like their task is accomplished. And then from there, they're glassy-eyed. They know they've accomplished their task, but they really are empty-headed, spaced out afterwards, for lack of a better term. And that's the way people describe Sirhan, that he was just not there, like comatose, like he didn't even know what he had done, which fits, like I say, what people say are hypnotized assassins. Who knows? We don't know. We know that this would certainly, I can't see why the CIA would say, oh, no, we don't want to investigate this hypnotism, because why wouldn't the CIA and Defense Department, of course the Soviets are first with everything, but why wouldn't the American CIA want people who they could train to be assassins and then not be able to have blowback, not be able to come back to them because they honestly couldn't remember them? You could drain their memory banks if they were computers and see that there's no memory of who programmed them to do what they did. So it's really a perfect weapon. I don't know why the CIA wouldn't be interested in it. Like I say, the Soviets, I certainly believe, were doing mind control experiments as far back as at least the 40s. We know the CIA was using LSD, which was legal then. It's documented. You can watch film of them having people go under the influence of LSD. Now, whether they used psychedelic drugs and hallucinogens to try to create assassins and people to do other nefarious things, who knows? Who knows? You can research the movie La Femme Nikita, which was made into an American film called Point of No Return. That's similar. The theme of that movie was they take at least the protagonist of that film, the American film. They take a woman who was involved in a vicious robbery, purportedly possibly killed, taken out secretly before she could go to prison, go to trial, and then trained as an assassin, given a new identity, and had to carry on these assassinations, or she herself would be killed, and anyone she got close to was allowed to get close to. The movie Manchurian Candidate, obviously, the Manchurian Candidate actually did a remake, Denzel Washington, and that was same premise. There's also a movie, and I haven't seen it, but one called, I believe, First Lady, and it was about the First Lady being a spy for the Soviet Union. So the Manchurian Candidate, referring to Manchuria Candidate, China being a politician rising in the ranks, being a spy for America's enemies. So, I don't know, folks. Oh, why are the glasses on? I can see. Was Bobby Kennedy, was Sirhan perhaps mentally ill and just decided to kill Bobby Kennedy, and then he either can't remember it or says he can't remember it? I mean, he's obviously in the decades since been examined by numerous psychiatrists, and no one has, to my knowledge, has come out and said, one way or the other, that this guy's faking it, or this guy absolutely, these feelings are buried and he actually can't remember. Probably the latter more than the former. So was Sirhan a crazed assassin who just is mentally ill? It's possible. Picked Bobby Kennedy as his target of rage and has served every day since then in prison. It's possible. Or was Sirhan coaxed or mind controlled, hypnotized, or a paid assassin to kill Robert Kennedy? Certainly, I think our country's history was different. Would have been a lot different. I've also heard another theory, not about the death, that if Bobby Kennedy hadn't been killed, certain elements of the underworld would have used tapes they had of him and his involvement with Marilyn Monroe to ruin his campaign for president. Of course, they could have ruined his campaign for Senate in '64 with those same tapes. So we don't know, folks, and we'll never know. Again, these enduring mysteries. Anyway, that's it. I know that I don't get every single nuance correct. I don't have notes in front of me. Obviously, I'm going from the top of my head from my knowledge on these subjects. So if there's things you can correct me about, and I'm sure you can correct me about, and I'm sure there are, just bear that in mind. Don't attack me for it if you don't mind. I wouldn't attack you because I don't have every single note in front of me. I believe the woman who said, the polka dot dress woman, pastor, and said that was Sandra Serrano, but I could be wrong about that. And I believe Hank Hernandez was the LAPD investigator who gave her such a hard time. If I'm wrong, let me know, but we'll see about that. Okay, folks, Ron here. If you like the subject, if you like, boy, this is the second video I've done today and I'm tired. Anyway, if you like the channel, please do subscribe. If you do subscribe, please hit the little bell icon next to the subscription button so you'll be notified when I post, and please give the channel likes. Let's turn around for a second and look at the boats in the harbor one more time. I gotta go home and walk my dog. It's late. Get on home, it's late. All right, guys, I'll see you at the next location. Thanks for watching and listening. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.